Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate 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 Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, text number 30. Vaikarikan Mano Jagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Dig Vatarka Shvi Vanindro Pindra Mitra Ka Vaikarikan Mano Jagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachito Shvi Vanindro Pindra Mitra Kaha Vaikarikan Mano Jagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachito Shvi Vanindro Pindra Mitra Kaha Vaikarikan Mano Jagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachito Shvi Vanindro Pindra Mitra Kaha. Please repeat.
Vaikarikan Manojagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachitosvi Vahinindro Pindra Mitrakaha Vaikarikan Manojagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachitosvi Vahinindro Pindra Mitrakaha
Vaikarikan Manojagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachetosvi Vahnindro Pendra Mitrakaha
Madhajis.
Vaikarikan Manojagye Deva Vaikarika Dasha Digvatarka Prachitosvi Vahinindro Pindra Mitrakaha
Vaikarikat, from the mode of goodness. Manaha, the mind. Jagye, generated. Devaha, demigods. Vaikarikaha, in the mode of goodness. Dasha, 10. Dik, the controller of directions. Vata, the controller of air. Arka, the sun god. Prachittaha, Varuna. Ashvi, the Ashvini Kumaras. Vahni, the fire god. Indra, the king of heaven. Upindra, the deity in heaven. Mitra, one of the 12 Adityas. Kaha, Prajapati Brahma. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. From the mode of goodness, the mind is generated and becomes manifest, as also the 10 demigods controlling the bodily movements. Such demigods are known as the controller of the directions, the controller of the air, the sun god Varuna, the Ashwini Kumars, the fire god, the king of heaven, the worshipable deity in heaven, the chief of the Adityas, and the Brahmaji, the Prajapati. All come into existence. Purport. Vaikarika is the neutral stage of creation, and Tejas is the initiative of creation, while Tamas is the full display of material creation under the spell of the darkness of ignorance. Manufacture of the necessities of life and factories and workshops, excessively prominent in the age of Kali or in the age of the machine, is the summit stage of the quality of darkness. Such manufacturing enterprises by human society are in the mode of darkness because factually there is no necessity for the commodities manufactured. Human society primarily requires food for subsistence, shelter for sleeping, defense for protection, and commodities for satisfaction of the senses. The senses are the practical signs of life, as will be explained in the next verse. Human civilization is meant for purifying the senses, and objects of sense satisfaction should be supplied as much as absolutely required, but not for aggravating artificial sensory needs. Food, shelter, defense, and sense gratification are all needs in material existence. Otherwise, in its pure, uncontaminated state of original life, the living entity has no such needs. The needs are therefore artificial, and in the pure state of life, there are no such needs. As such, increasing the artificial needs, as is the standard of material society, is a sort of engagement in darkness without knowledge. By such engagement, human society is spoiled, and because human energy is primarily meant for purifying the senses in order to engage them and satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord, being the supreme possessor of spiritual senses, is the master of the senses, Hrishikesh. Hrishika means the senses, and Isha means the master. The Lord is not the servant of the senses, or, in other words, he is not directed by the dictation of the senses, but the conditioned soul or the individual living entities are servants of the senses. They are conducted by the direction or dictation of the senses, and therefore material civilization is a kind of engagement in sense gratification only. The standard of human civilization should be to cure the disease of sense gratification, and one can do this simply by becoming an agent for satisfying the spiritual senses of the Lord. The senses are never to be stopped in their engagements, but one should purify them by engaging them in the pure service of sense gratification of the master of the senses. This is the instruction of the whole Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna wanted first of all to satisfy his own senses by his decision not to fight with his kinsmen and friends. But Lord Sri Krishna taught him the Bhagavad Gita just to purify Arjuna's decision for sense gratification. Therefore, Arjuna agreed to satisfy the senses of the Lord. And thus he fought the battle of Kurukshetra as the Lord desired. The Vedas instruct us to get out of the existence of darkness and go forward on the path of light. Tamasi ma jyotirgama. The path of light is therefore to satisfy the senses of the Lord. Misguided men or less intelligent men follow the path of self-realization without any attempt to satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord by following the path shown by Arjuna and other devotees of the Lord. On the contrary, they artificially try to stop the activities of the senses, the yoga system, or they deny the transcendental senses of the Lord, the jnana system. The devotees, however, are above the yogis and the jnanis because pure devotees do not deny the senses of the Lord. They want to satisfy the senses of the Lord. Only because of the darkness of ignorance do the yogis and jnanis deny the senses of the Lord and thus artificially try to control the activities of the diseased senses. In the diseased condition of the senses, there is too much engagement of the senses and increasing material needs. When one comes to see the disadvantage of aggravating the sense activities, one is called a jnani. And when one tries to stop the activities of the senses by the practice of yogic principles, he is called a yogi. But when one is fully aware of the transcendental senses of the Lord and tries to satisfy his senses, one is called a devotee of the Lord. The devotees of the Lord do not try to deny the senses of the Lord, nor do they artificially stop the action of the senses. But they do voluntarily engage their purified senses in the service of the master of the senses, as was done by Arjuna. thereby easily attaining the perfection of satisfying the Lord, the ultimate goal of all perfection. Om Gyanatimrandasya Gananjana Shalakya Chakshura Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadahma Yam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshta Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Ragadatam Vitam Tam Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaganan Lalita Shivashakan Vitamshta He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatapate Gopisha Gopaka Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshware Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranama Mihare Pre Vanchakapatu Vishakripasanubi Pachapati Tanam Pavani Abhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtai Putale Shmati Bhakti Vakasa Swaman Itinamane Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtai Putri Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Prasharne Nirvishesha Shunavari Pashtati Adishatarne Bhuter Mahadbir Yen Mafbor Vibor Nirmaya Shati Amushu Purashaha Bhunkti Gunan Shodasha Shodashatmakaha Solang Kushishta Bhagavan Vachamsime. Could I get some water? Somebody, would you mind? Sorry, that was a long purport. So the verse, it's quite lengthy and won't go over it again, but it's dealing with the creation of the demigods, more or less. So this is the secondary creation, as is the title of this canto, and we're in like the thick of it, more or less. The creation in its full, in its minute detail, is being very painstakingly described. And this isn't so technical, but it gets very technical around these purports, and then it goes on to describe the universal form of the Lord. So I'll mainly touch on Srila Prabhupada's purport because he's very mercifully given us instructions relevant to our own situation. His purport covers different aspects. There's a few I want to touch, but specifically starting with the first, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that, well, first of all, just I was reading Srila Prabhupada writes here, manufacture of the necessities of life in factories and workshops, excessively prominent in the age of Kali, thank you, or in the age of the machine, is the summit stage of the quality of darkness. So that's interesting, actually. Srila Prabhupada writes here that this technological advancement of civilization, although ordinary society, I mean, it's just as if you look at the news, the measure of civilization and the measure of advancement is generally taken by our technical progress in developing technology or science, but they kind of go hand in hand. Science, with the progress of science, with the progression of scientific theories, then that translates into practical manifestation, technical advancement in technology. But Srila Prabhupada here, he's equating the opposite. He's saying this technical advancement of civilization that excessively prominent in the age of Kali, or in the age of the machine, is the summit stage of the quality of darkness. And specifically, he makes the point that manufacturing excessive commodities and manufacturing more than what's needed. He writes later in the purport that the basic food, shelter, defense, and sense gratification are all needs of material existence. Just like you were quoting this district, ahara nidrabhayam cha. I don't know the floors. So these four basic Srila Prabhupada who quote this, so practically every other public lecture, Prabhupada would hammer on this point that these are the basic principles of any sort of material life. Any living entities, they have these necessities of life, but the human being is endowed with a higher sense. So many different times Srila Prabhupada will make this point, and again, second canto of Bhagavatam, he's making this point again. But he emphasizes that all these things are there, and of course, elsewhere he will make the point that all these things are there. We have to have food, we have to have shelter, we have to defend ourselves, and what is that? Sense gratification, he actually gives here, is necessary to some, or mating elsewhere he translates as, is necessary to some degree, but it's when these things come in too much, Srila Prabhupada uses some word here, I forget, too much something. When things are coming in too much excess, when the needs of life are made to be too much, or they're inflated in other words, then society enters into darker and darker regions of the modes of material nature. Because for so many different reasons. Because primarily because the aim of life is starts to revolve around these things, and it's just a fundamental principle. Instead of striving for, just like he's quoting here, the Vedas teach us to get out of this existence, tamasi majyotirgama. Instead of getting out of this material mess, the by becoming enwrapped with his needs of life, our focus and society's focus is just more and more, rather than getting out of this abominable condition, is to try and improve it, and enjoy it more and more and more. And I mean, so much could be said on this point. There's been so much said before, but the whole society revolves around this point of just like now I'm personally trying to find like a laptop. So just the thing is, the whole industry, every single year they come out with some sort of, I mean, we all have a phone. Every single year they release a new phone, to the degradation of the old one. New laptop, new this, new that. Everything is constantly being replaced. And in this way they create, even though you may have like, the like light speed device that's basically a portable computer, because these manufacturers, they work in such a way that they create a dissatisfaction within your mind, because you have the 2022 model, you don't have the 2023 model. And among the 2023 models, you have maybe a mid-tier version, you don't have the high-tier version. And this way, this is just one example. There's so many different areas of material life. This artificial increase of the necessities of life is created. What to speak of this? This is just something very, very fine. Is even to the extent that building large buildings with air-conditioned rooms and internal heating is not necessary for. To some degree, it may be necessary for heating, but the grand arrangements they're made now, just like if you see in Midtown, they're constructing so many different buildings. If you drive by there, you see it's like a whole army that's been deployed to build these things. So much money, and material is being poured into these things, and then they're constructed, and then what happens is, what is the necessity for such things? Even logically, why would you build up when you can easily build out? But even then, why pack into a city, just like a few of us were living in New York, why pack into a city like rats unnecessarily? And even the richest man in New York, even the upper class, also they have to take the MTA subway, which is just littered with rats and homeless people and has an obnoxious stench. So what's the benefit of living in such a situation? It's just, as Srila Prabhupada is saying here, this is the result of increasing the artificial necessities of life. It may not be immediately apparent. Immediately, it may be like, oh, I can do so many things on my phone. And you can read Bhagavad Gita, this and that. But if you see the whole overall direction of the civilization, if you take New York in a nutshell, in a capsule, you see the result that's there. Anybody, whether a devotee or a karmi that's lived in New York, unless they're crazy, won't agree that it's a nice place. Just like I was talking to, some months ago, I was talking to some contractor, some roofer guy, and he grew up in Brooklyn, and he was in New York for 40 years. And he told me the best decision of my life, he had a thick Brooklyn accent. He said, the best decision I made was leaving New York. But you see, New York is, I mean, not to smash New York so much. There's so many other cities that are just like Tokyo, Beijing, so many other cities. You see the conglomeration of the mode of passionate ignorance, and it just increases and increases and increases. And what does it all revolve around? Artificially increasing the necessities of life. People, just like Srila Prabhupada, who writes, I'll pull it up, I think it's 551. It's the first text of the spiritual yoga we distributed, I think. Yeah, so I always remember this purport, especially giving people the spiritual yoga especially is very nice, because this purport is so relevant to everybody's situation. So Srila Prabhupada, you could pull it up. I think it's the second paragraph. It is significant. It starts with 5.5, chapter 5, text 1. And then I'll start just from it is significant, the paragraph in the purport. I think it's the second one. that it? Okay. It is significant in this verse that the government and the natural guardian, the father, should educate themselves, subordinates, and raise them to Krishna consciousness. Devoid of Krishna consciousness, every living being suffers in the cycle of birth and death perpetually. To relieve them for this bondage and enable them to become blissful and happy, Bhakti Yoga should be taught, just as Srila Prabhupada is saying in today's purport, that we should engage the senses in the service of the master of the senses. But he says, a foolish civilization neglects to teach people how to rise to the platform of Bhakti Yoga. Without Krishna consciousness, a person is no better than a hog or dog. The instructions or shabda are very essential at the present moment. People are being educated and trained to work very hard for sense gratification, and there is no sublime aim in life. A man travels to earn his livelihood, leaving home early in the morning, catching a local train, and being packed in a compartment. He has to stand for an hour or two in order to reach his place of business. Then again, he takes a bus to get to the office. At the office, he works hard from 9 to 5. Then he takes 2 or 3 hours to return home. After eating, he has sex and goes to sleep. For all this hardship, his only happiness is a little sex. Yen maitinadi griyamede sakam hitacham. And he continues on like this, but it's where I mean, it's so relevant. Just like if you most of us don't have this experience because usually we're here during the Bhagavatam class. But one day, the day I took you to Kalki Prabhu and Jitagrish Prabhu to drop them off in New Talavan, I like left around this time. And if you get on the freeway at this time, it's like packed. It's the same thing. You know, you may not be standing in a subway for like an hour or two because we're in Atlanta, but you will be sitting on I-75, I-80 for an hour just to get to your place of work. And then you work all day. It's not so. Most of us are young. Maybe some of us haven't worked full-time jobs, but it's like a fact. If you see people who have spent their whole life in this material life, just like I was relating to the brahmachari some time ago, I was talking to one fellow, and he was an older guy. He worked on cars like all his life, basically, and he was with the same company in General Motors for something like, I don't know, 40, 50 years. He was like an electrician that worked on parts. Anyway, and so he told me, so I was like, okay, what happens? You just want to retire? Or like, what was the deal? You know, he was getting paid high, but he said, well, you know, I mean, anyway, side point, if you know, General Motors, they had financial difficulties some years ago, and they're still kind of having, and so he told me they shut down half their factories, but they wanted to keep their production level the same. So they wanted their workers to work basically something like 12, 14-hour days. And he said, you know, I got to that, they were wanting that from me. And at that point, I thought, you know, it's like a little too much. So I just called in my retirement and then I took off. I was shocked, actually, because you know, you hear Prabhupada talk about this, but like I've never, and I know people will work long hours, but like, you know, to like be there with somebody who's like I was shocked, and I told him, or I asked him, you know, why would you accept there are so many other jobs, you can find a job, even a well-paying job, why would you continue with such a living in a hellish situation? Because it's like, you know, basically you wake up, you go to work, and that's it. Just as Srila Prabhupada is saying in this purport here. You come back, you enjoy some sex, and then you sleep, and then you repeat the cycle, and then you die. You take another birth, then you go to insects, then you repeat the same whole thing over again, as Kapila Dev says in the 3rd canto. But he told me, you would be surprised, actually. Most people, they go for it. Why? Because they buy, you know, they get in too much debt. They buy these big houses, they buy these big cars. They increase these artificial necessities of life, as Prabhupada is saying here, and they can't pay it off. So they get these big houses, they get these big cars to drive to work for 2 hours. They get these big houses that they can sleep only 6 hours in, and then the rest of the day it just lies vacant. Just as Krishna Kesha Prabhu, one of the first things when we went to Atlanta, I'll remember this for probably the rest of my life, is that he was seeing all these houses and he would say, they're all empty. There's no car, there's nobody there. You know, in India, there's always so much activity. The door is open, the wife is there, the children are there. But here in America, it's like, you know, just like I was seeing our neighbor, they were leaving at like, I was standing Japa looking at the window, the sun was rising. He's leaving at like 6:30 in the morning. He'll probably come back like 6:30 at night. So, yeah, it's such a hell. And so anyway, I'm getting a little deviated, but so So these guys, they were buying these very expensive commodities, very expensive artificial necessities, and he was saying, yeah, they just go on like this, and then maybe once a year, once every 2 years, they have some vacation for 6 days. They may get Memorial Day off. Yeah, no, if you that's like a standard. The standard vacation is like once a year, you get 7 days, or maximum is 2 weeks, but you can't take a 2 week vacation every year. That's how it is. The most fortunate people are those who are in the educational system because they at least get a summer off if they're not teaching a summer class. So anyway, so this is a vivid description of what Prabhupada is talking about here. It's going on every single day. We may not have so much experience of it if we were living in a temple, but when you're out there, it's like, my God, just like just last Thursday, I went shopping at Costco. They're closed on Memorial Day. Otherwise, if we didn't have plans for book distribution, devotees would be completely oblivious to what Memorial Day is. The fact that it's there. But I was shopping in Costco. Every single worker there was talking about Memorial Day. The fact that because they get that one day off, one day, and everybody was so excited. It's a fact too, most of us have been to school, and that one day, we also got Memorial Day, that one day you get off school, that one day you get more to your weekend is like pure concentrated like bliss, But actually, it's just like Prabhupada would say, it's like submerging a drowning man, and then that one day is the 1 second he has with his head above the water. It's a completely miserable situation. So therefore, these things, these artificialness, and all of this is caused by these artificial necessities. All of this hard work for unnecessary jobs to accumulate unnecessary money. What is it? It's all it's all unnecessary. All this education is just to get another job to work like an ass. You study all of these stupid topics. You may be majoring in English, but they force you to study so many different other things. And even then, half the stuff you learn in a university is outdated by the time you get out. So it's a completely idiotic civilization. It's so stupid. Srila Prabhupada, he would call it a demonic civilization, actually. It doesn't make sense either spiritually or materially. If you want to, it's just like Srila Prabhupada often recite, and my own spiritual master often makes the points too, that, traditionally, people, just like a potter, he would be trained that his father was a potter, his grandfather was a potter, and this way he would become a potter and be satisfied. A barber, he comes in, that's his family, whatever, occupation. Even formerly in the West also, just like we were mentioning recently, just like last names, there's things like cobbler, etc., like this. In English, indicating that formerly one's occupation was like this. But now you go to school and then you study for like 18 years of your life, completely useless topics. You learn how to speak English and that's about it. You learn how to add some numbers. You learn how to multiply. You forget how to do long division. And all these other things, world history has nothing to do with your situation. Meanwhile, people come out of the educational system. They don't know how to do anything practical. They don't know how to cook for themselves. They don't even know how to do their own taxes, which the government requires of them. They're not qualified for any sort of job, so therefore they have to go on to a college so that they become more qualified in useless things. And actually, it's not until the actual qualification that the people that run these unnecessary jobs won't, is that you start working the job, you start an internship, and then you become qualified for the post of the job. Otherwise, all the education is useless. This is the system we're dealing with. This is the system that is propagated in society, and it just leads one down and down and down. It's like a mini samsara, actually. It's like, there's the cycle of birth and death, and then there's the cycle of like the modern society, because it's work, eat, sleep, and that's it, and mate and fin, like that. And in the midst of it, just as in the midst of birth and death, the conditioned soul doesn't think to remember Krishna. In the midst of all of this, nobody stops and thinks, why am I doing all of this? What about the fact I have to die? What about the fact that none of this actually makes me happy? What about the fact that all of this is temporary? All of this is completely forgotten, and one is just trapped in the rat race of this this mindset of, okay, the next day is going to be better. The next day, I'll enjoy more sense gratification. Next year, I'll get a raise. Maybe next year, I'll go on vacation like this. And this is the result. But human life is not meant for any of this. Human life, the primary, Srila Prabhupada says here, human society primarily requires food for sustenance, shelter for sleeping, defense for protection, and commodities for the satisfaction of the senses. And he says that human civilization is meant for purifying the senses, and the object of sense satisfaction should be supplied as much as absolutely required. So all these things, it's is complete an external show. You don't need any of it to survive. It's just like if you go to less developed countries, just like, my brother, he personally went to Honduras. So many people go as well. If you see, they don't have any sort of technological advancement. They're living in huts. They're not just huts. They live in slums, practically speaking. But still, people survive. They maintain their human life even without all these artificial necessities. And so if people can even subside off this, what to speak of, what is the necessity of such a grand, verbois civilization that's going on nowadays, that's being propagated now, not just in the West, but all over the world. But the main thing of human society is not to cover over and to infatuate the senses more of these things, but is meant to purify the senses. The next point Prabhupada makes is that this purification is brought about by engaging the service and the master of the senses. That Sarva Parivinir Muktam Tat Parat Veda Nirmalam Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sivanam Bhaktir Uchyati. That devotional bhakti is known, but engaging the senses and the master of the senses is called bhakti, simply put. Very famous verse. And Prabhupada says here, Hrishik means the senses, and Isha means the master. The Lord is not the servant of the senses, or, in other words, he is not directed by the dictations of the senses. But the conditioned souls, or the individual living entities, are servants of the senses. And so all of this is going on. Why don't people object to this? Why don't people come to the wake up out of this? It's because they're addicted to serving their own senses. They can't understand the difference between sense satisfaction and actual real self-interest or real happiness. It's just like, I was reading this, one incident comes to my mind. The devotees I think it's shortly after they organized the first Sankirtan party in 1968. It was Vishnujan Prabhu at the time, Tamal Krishna Prabhu at the time, and then I think Jayananda was also traveling with him. Yamuna Mataji was also there. It was like the full crew in San Francisco. And they went up to, I think Seattle, if I'm not wrong. And and they were distributing back the Godheads, and they were also doing kirtan. They had they were trained by Prabhupada to play harmonium, mridanga, kartal, and like this. They were doing it on the street. And then, if my memory is serving me correctly, one businessman, he saw them and he invited the devotees to their home for a performance. So anyway, the devotees went, and it was like a party basically, and they were given some sort of like compensation for it. And basically, the man wanted to hire the devotees professionally and have them come to so many different degraded events and perform their kirtan, because the kirtan was very pleasing to his senses. And so the man, he was intoxicated, and he said something to the devotees. Had all kinds of funny names, just like Vishnujan, that he had never seen before. And he said, "Can you give me a name?" And the devotees, I think Tamal Krishna Goswami, he said, "Okay, your name is Godas," because and he was very enlivened by this name, actually. He's the servant of the senses. You see, obviously, he's intoxicating himself. He's just looking how to get by day, how to look out the next sort of pleasure for his own sense satisfaction. So the living entities in this world, they are servants of their senses. But if we engage our senses in the master of the senses, not only do our senses become purified, actually, we get real sense satisfaction. There's one verse, Naivatmanaf Prabhu Ayam Nijalapapurno, Manam Janada Vidusha Karuno Vrineti, Yad Yajdano Bhagavati Vidita Manam, Tachatmani Prati Mukasi Itamukasa Shrihi. That Prahlad Maharaj, he prays very beautifully there. He says that the Supreme Lord, he's fully satisfied in himself. He doesn't require to have anything. And when something is offered to the Lord, the offering by the Lord's mercy is for the actually is for the benefit of the devotee. It's for the purification of the devotee. And the example is given there. It's just like if you decorate your own face. Similarly, or rather, I think I'm getting it the other way around. If you decorate your face the face in a mirror, similarly, you decorate your own face. The reflection is the same as your own face. So similarly, if we offer things to Krishna, if we engage in Krishna service, not only is Krishna satisfied, actually we become satisfied. Everybody becomes, by watering the root, everything else becomes fully nourished. And so many times, Prabhupada gave you the example. So similarly too, all this advancement of civilization, it actually doesn't make you. We all have experience of this. Practically, most of us are coming from some sort of engagement in Western society, and we wouldn't be here at Western society if the materialistic civilization satisfied us. Because actually, it's the same thing. Just go. You can be in. There's so many different jada ras, there are so many different material rasas, but actually it's all the same thing because it just boils down to sense gratification. Whether you get your sense gratification out of doing very great charitable works, out of studying philosophy, out of solving mathematical formulas, out of just working hard, out of getting a lot of money, out of enjoying a lot of sex life, out of eating good food. Actually, it's the same very basic principle. If you can pull up this verse, actually, 5:5, no. Adilila 5:146, I think. It's this, No, it's, how does that start? Krishnendriya, Admendriya, oh, hang on, I got it wrong. How does that start? What's the first one? Atmin. I got the verse number wrong. Hang on. Icha. At. How do you spell Admendriya? At. Oh, there's an E. Okay, I see. Okay, so it's 4165. I'm sorry. Wrong chapter. Atmendriya priti vancha thari bhalikam krishnendriya priti icha thari premanam. Very basic definition. So you can pull this up because I want to read from the purport. So anyway, even this verse is relevant. Is this satisfaction of our own senses is termed kam. What does kam lead to? Kamesha, krodesha, rajaguna, samudbhavaha. Kam. And this kam is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport over there that when sense, for this Bhagavad Gita verse, Srila Prabhupada writes that when sense satisfaction, when is left, when it's not fulfilled, it's transformed into anger. And then this anger, it transforms into illusion. I'm sorry? The next verse he writes like that? The next verse it says like that. It actually says like that. He also puts in the purport there too, though. So anyway, but on the flip side, real love, prema, is rendering service to Krishna's senses. And so much could be spoken about this. So there's a few points of this purport. Scroll down to the point. The author of the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, that's the main one. So this is what I was thinking of. The author of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita asserts with authority that sexual love is a matter of personal sense enjoyment. All regular principles in the Vedas pertaining to desires for popularity, fatherhood, wealth, and so on are different phases of sense gratification. Here's the important part. That acts of sense gratification may be performed under the cover of public welfare, nationalism, religion, altruism, ethical codes, biblical codes, health directives, fruitive action, bashfulness, tolerance, personal comfort, liberation from material bondage, progress, family affection, or fear of social ostracism or legal punishment. But all these categories are different subdivision of one substance, sense gratification. So it doesn't matter what you're doing in material life, even actually if it's apparently religious, as Prabhupada is saying, ethical codes, biblical codes, if boils down to the same substance of sense gratification, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. all such good acts are performed basically for one's own sense gratification, for no one can sacrifice his personal interest while discharging these much advertised moral and religious principles. Why is all this sense gratification? It sounds very controversial if you read this actually. So many people, ethical codes, moral codes, altruism. How is this sense gratification? But one engages in these activities. Why? For his own benefit, actually. Prabhupada will explain so many times. Why do millionaires give away so much in charity? Well, A, they get tax benefits. B, they'll get criticized if they don't, but also it makes people feel good. Even when I speak of millionaires, just lay people, they help other people because there's sense satisfaction there. It's just like Prahlad Maharaj, he elsewhere says that relationships in this world, it's something like a mercantile relationship. You know this? I don't know where it comes at all. I don't know if it's in those prayers or it's in there. The next chapter. Oh, the next chapter. Those are also prayers. Yeah. So anyway, so the point there is that in this world relationship, when one person is supplying sense gratification to another party, when one person scratches another's back and the other scratches the other's back, then there's a relationship and there's what's called love, but actually it's just lust. And when one party stops giving out, then the relationship breaks, and then you see this true nature, the true form of the relationship. It comes out. So similarly, too, even if somebody is going to church executing biblical codes, very much an advocate of ethical principles, of moral principles, just like people try to save the whales, just like even people try to. They're concerned about animal welfare. They're concerned about suffering, starving people. But ultimately, they derive some sort of sense satisfaction from this. It may be more subtle, but it's still the same basic principle. But Prabhupada, he continues in this purport, but above all of this is a transcendental stage in which one feels himself to be only an eternal servitor of Krishna, the absolute personality of Godhead. So, what is it? Can you read that out for me? Because I can't quite.
O Supreme, otherwise, O Lord, O Supreme Instructor of the entire world, you are so kind to your devotee that you do not induce him to do something unbeneficial to him. On the other hand, one who desires some material benefit in exchange for devotional service cannot be a pure devotee. Indeed, he is no better than a merchant who wants profit in exchange of service.
So Prahlad Maharaj spoke this when Nrsimhadev was inducing him to take a benediction, actually. So you see the difference of the relationship between the devotee and Krishna, his Lord, and the mundane relationships of this world. The devotee, it's completely, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, elsewhere, somewhere here, he writes, it's just like iron and gold. They're both metal, and one may even mistake another for one for the other. They may appear similar, but actually they're completely different. So similarly too, this material love and this pure love of Krishna, innate in the conditioned soul, innate in any soul, is completely different in quality. It's always there residing in his heart. And it's such a beautiful thing in that naturally the soul becomes happy, naturally the jiva becomes enlivened and happy by rendering service to Krishna. Because it's such a pure, unadulterated relationship. A pure devotee, he only desires to serve Krishna and nothing else. That's his joy in life. That's his life and soul. And by doing so, even by sacrificing his own self-interest, not only is Krishna satisfied, he becomes satisfied and attains the highest level of transcendental bliss. In contrast this with those materialists, or even those jnanis or yogis, as Prabhupada is saying elsewhere in the purport, who are striving either grossly or subtly for their own sense satisfaction, whether it be they want to get another paycheck, they want to enjoy gross sex desire, they want to enjoy intoxication, or different things, or whether it be very, very subtle, and they want to attain liberation from the material elements, or try to become one with God. It's all the same basic principle. But the devotee, as Prabhupada writes much later in today's purport, but one is fully aware of the transcendental senses of the Lord, and tries to satisfy his senses, one is called a devotee of the Lord. The devotees do not try to deny the senses of the Lord, nor do they artificially stop the actions of the senses, but they do voluntarily engage the purified senses in the service of the master of the senses, as was done by Arjuna. So, as in I don't know the Sanskrit, but quoting what Prabhupada is quoting here, the English, when Arjuna says to Krishna that, I become free from illusion and now I'll fight, Prabhupada says something to the effect in that purport that he had, by acting on Krishna's order, hang on, let me see. Yeah, how does that go? That's by, no, I'm thinking of what Prabhupada writes in the purport. Sorry, I've just gone blank. Do you know the verse number for that? 18 what? One sec. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Nashto Maham Smriti Labda. So, Prabhupada writes here in the purport that the living entity's constitutional position, you don't have to pull it up, it's a small thing I'll read, is to be a servitor. He has to serve either the illusory Maya or the Supreme Lord. If he serves the Supreme Lord, he is in his normal condition. But if he prefers to serve the illusory external energy, then certainly he will be in bondage. So this is the point I was trying to make, that either we have to serve Maya or Krishna. And Prabhupada says here in today's purport, we can voluntarily engage in serving Krishna with purified senses, or we'll be forced by Maya to engage in her service, to engage in so many different illusory forms of service, the service of our wife, of our kids, of our society, of our family, all these temporary and illusory things. So I'm running a little out of time, but there's another point I wanted to make. So Prabhupada writes, so yes, let me try to find it. I'm trying to find the part about Arjuna. So anyway, I can paraphrase it if I'm not immediately seeing it. So Srila Prabhupada says in today's purport that in less intelligent men, they don't follow the path that Arjuna followed in the Bhagavad Gita, and they try to satisfy the senses. First paragraph. What does it go? No, I think it comes to the second paragraph. He's specifically talking about, oh yeah, the second paragraph here. The path of light, sorry, is to satisfy the sense of the Lord. Misguided men, here's the sentence, or less intelligent men follow the path of self-realization without any attempt to satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord by following the path shown by Arjuna and other devotees of the Lord. So this is the important point, that the satisfaction of the senses of the Lord, there's a method to do it. Just like so many times quoted, Tarko Pratishta Shatuyo Vipina Nasa Vrishya Yasamatam Nabinam Dharmasya Tatvam Netam Guhaya Gatasapantaha. That by following the path chalked out by the Mahajans, we can actually know what is Dharma, and the intricate, and what is Dharma, Savaipam Samparo Dharmoita Bhakti Dokshajit. That we can know that highest Dharma, that meaning how to render Krishna consciousness, simply put, in some plain English, by following past devotees, by following the Mahajans. And particularly, I mean, just like this verse comes to the sixth canto, Swayambhur Narada Shambhu Kumara Kapilo Manahu Pralado Janako Bhishmo Vayasakir Vayam. There are 12 Mahajans, but there's so many other Mahajans actually. Haridas Thakur, he's a Mahajan for us. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, I mean, he himself is a Mahajan. He also referred to his own spiritual father, his own Gurmars as well. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he refers to him as a Mahajan. So many different things. So if you look at the words, so we can understand how to satisfy the senses of Krishna by following the footsteps of our acharyas and our past authorities. Just like I was giving an example of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he's given us so many different things. Narottam Das as well, so many different things are there. Just like Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he sings Gaur Bhakta Priya Vesh Dadhana, that by adorning this vesh, this dress that is very dear to Lord Gauranga, that is very pleasing, that is very favorable to devotional service. On the flip side, he says, Abhakta Pradata Anna Na Kori Grahan. By accepting karmic grains effectively, it's conducive to devotional service. Similarly, Mayavade Sanganahi Magi Kono Kalo, that A devotee, he doesn't associate with Mayavadi. So there are principles of how to satisfy Krishna's senses. And there's a path that's been chalked out by previous authorities. You could pull up this verse, 10 to 30, I think. 10 to 30, 10 to 31. It's like obscure. It's Dvayam Bhujak Shakila Sattvatamni. No. Tvai Ambujak Shakila Sattvatamni Samadina Vishadachitta Sakit Vatpada Putinam Hat Kretina Koravantiko Vatsaparam Bhavabdim. That's the demigods prayed something to the effect of, "Oh Lord, you, by concentrating on your lotus feet every second constitutes like actual samadhi." And this path has been, okay, I'll just read the translation. "O lotus ad Lord, concentrating one's meditation on your lotus feet, which are the reservoir of all existence, and by accepting those lotus feet as the boat by which to cross the ocean of nescience, one follows in the footsteps of the Mahajans, great saints, sages, and devotees. By this process, one can cross the ocean of nescience as easily as one steps over the hoof print of a calf." Because you go to the next verse as well. I forget how it starts. "O lotus ad Lord, as brilliant as the sun, Dvayam Bhajaksha." What's the Sanskrit for this? How does that begin? "Svayam smotirya sudusturam duman bhavarnavam pima vadaprasaridaha bhavat paramburo navamatrade nidhayata sad anugraho bhavan." So, the demigods, they pray these two very beautiful verses. I think they were recently quoted. "O Lord, who resemble the shining sun, you are always ready to fulfill the desire of your devotee, and therefore you are known as a desire tree, Vanchakalpataru. When acharyas completely take shelter of your lotus feet in order to cross the fierce ocean of nescience, they leave behind on earth the method by which they cross. And because you are very merciful to your devotees, you accept this method to help them." So connecting the points here that we can be purified of this horrible material life by engaging our senses in the master of the senses. And we learn how to do that by the process that's given by our acharyas. And Prabhupada specifically in so many different ways, in his books, in his instructions, in his letters, as well as our own previous acharyas, they've given us so many different processes and very painstakingly and very specifically made it, communicated what is pleasing to Krishna and what is not pleasing to Krishna. Prabhupada himself, he engaged us in so many different activities that are meant to for us to satisfy the senses of Krishna. There's like book distribution, kirtan, deity worship, book publication, book production, art, so many cooking as well, so many different things. But to each individual category, there's a method to do so. Because you may be doing kirtan with expert musical arrangement, but if you're not doing it with a proper mood, it's not pleasing to Krishna's senses. Similarly, you may be, I mean, it's a fact. You may be dressing the deity, but if you're dressing the deity in a Santa Claus outfit, that's not pleasing to Krishna's senses. And that's not what Prabhupada came to the West to give. Prabhupada came to the West and he gave a very specific program and he gave very specific instructions, a very specific culture of points. It's just like Prabhupada came, what did he introduce? What was the diet? He introduced those foodstuffs which are dear to Krishna. He introduced ladus, gulab jamuns, chapatis, rice, dal, wonderful chutneys, pushpana rice. There's so many different things. Kachoris, samosas, so many pakoras, so many different nice things. This is what Prabhupada gave. This is what Krishna, because it's what Krishna likes, and also it's somewhat because of that. It's also a very Krishna Prasadam is so nice just in and of itself. But Prabhupada didn't come to give us sandwiches, this and that. He didn't come to give us, not to smack talk. But it's a fact, actually. It's a fact, actually. To take it in a different direction, Prabhupada didn't come to the West and start playing on a guitar in kirtan. Once and nowadays is a different principle, okay? But the overarching principle is there. If we're making the satisfaction of the Vaishnava is also there, but the satisfaction of the Vaishnava is also pleased when when Krishna is pleased. So not to single that out. Anyway, taking a different example, it's just like if you're doing kirtan, Prabhupada specifically he gave us, he specified that harmonium, kartal, mridanga. There's some other things there. I think tambura he allowed, veena. I don't know. I forget. And without getting specific, there are specific instruments that Prabhupada gave. He didn't come to the West on the Jaladuta and bring an electric guitar with him or a drum set with him and start playing that, or come to the West and start adopting those means. In fact, I was seeing that when devotees tried to use those sorts of things, those things that weren't, obviously didn't give pleasure to Krishna's senses, Prabhupada, he expressed his dissatisfaction rather indirectly, directly or indirectly, just like has been related before when one devotee was very adamant about playing guitar in kirtan, or for Krishna, not in kirtan, and all the other devotees of the temple were disturbed. Prabhupada, knowing his nature, because the spiritual master is very expert at engaging devotees in Krishna's service, he said, okay, so why don't you travel around and play guitar for Krishna? And this way he sent him away from the temple, and he created a very peaceful atmosphere in the temple. Even though internally Prabhupada, it was obviously against these things. So in so many different ways, it's just like, there's so many different fields of Krishna consciousness. Just as there's the art, but there's a way that Srila Prabhupada, he also gave a very painstakingly, actually, if you see these letters that Prabhupada wrote, there's a Dvaita chart, not getting on that, but if does Kardama Muni have a beard? What is he sitting on? How does he look? Etc. Like this. Very painstaking details Prabhupada gave. And even the style of art, Prabhupada even dictated that to some degree. So there's a method. The point is, and succinct, that the expert devotees, the acharyas, they're very expert, and they know how to satisfy the senses of the Lord. It's just, actually, the Prabhupada writes in his poem, what is that? What's the translation of that? Shri Sarasvati Thakur is very dear to you. How does the translation for that come? Do you know? Paraphrase? And he's very expert in.
There's no one who's performed devotional service that can be measured to his amount of devotional service that he performed.
So this is the position of the acharyas, of the great devotees. Also, I think it's also mentioned in the song that.
There's no comparison to his devotional service.
Yeah. And so if we follow in the footsteps and follow the instructions of the path of the devotees of this caliber, then there's, in every single regard, there's full promise for all success in so many different ways. Srila Prabhupada gives us his guarantee, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the 12 Maharaj, even Shukadev Goswami. Krishna himself gives us his guarantee in the Bhagavad Gita himself. So by following this very, just like you were saying yesterday, I think, Mahasa Prabhu, Prabhupada gave us, you were quoting rather, Prabhupada he painted a straight line from here directly to Goloka Vrindavan, the spiritual world. And by sticking to that process, we know for a fact we'll satisfy Krishna. And we know for a fact, actually, can you scroll down in this purport in a little bit? Whoever's controlling. There's a point here. Keep going. Okay. The acharya's duty, therefore, is to find the means by which devotees may render service according to references from Shastra. Rupa Goswami, for instance, in order to help subsequent devotees publish such devotional books as Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Thus, it is the duty of the acharya to publish books that will help future candidates take up the method of service and become eligible to return home back to Godhead by the mercy of the Lord. And so it continues on like that, but principally, this is the main duty of the acharya, and the servants of the acharya help him in his duty. So there's so many different services, there's so many different aspects, but it's concentrated around this point of compiling books, publishing books, and also distributing this knowledge to the people in general, as well as studying it ourselves. The whole movement is based around and actually carried on by the instructions within Prabhupada's books. So if we very mold our whole life around these books, study them minutely, understand what is pleasing to Krishna, what is not pleasing to Krishna, and side by side as well, understand what is pleasing to Srila Prabhupada, what he wanted for his movement, what he wanted for his followers, his devotees, how he expected them to act, and we follow this, then we can know for certain that we're purifying our senses of all this material contamination, and this hell of material life that I was talking about, we can completely have nothing to do with it. Even though we may be in the midst of it, distributing books, we have a city and a temple, somewhat. I mean, we have a temple and a city, somewhat in a city. But still, it's still we're untouched by all these things, and we become more and more purified to make further advancement in devotional service. So there's many other points in the purport, but this is kind of like the gist of what I wanted to cover. So I can end it now and take any questions or comments anybody has at this point.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
It appears to me just a lot of learned scholars are here, but you are going from one end of Shastra to another. I could see you are quoting from various places. Prabhupada has given us rice, dal, chapati, sabji, puri, samosas, and sweets, so many things. And sometimes we offer more than 1,008 preparations.
Mm-hmm.
And prasadam is transcendental. But at the same time, we have to take what we can digest. You know, we do not have to take 1,008 preps and just put it in our mouth and we cannot digest. So even the prasadam is transcendental. So we have to be very careful what we are eating, whether we can digest it or not. This is just a comment, question. You quoted that sloka, Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakale Ashanta.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's Ashanta. They're working, they're doing this, they're doing that, the XYZ type of activities they're doing. So they're all Ashanta, unhappy. Ataeva Krishna Bhakta Santa. Krishna Bhakta, those who are engaged in Krishna service, they are happy. So those who are serving in heaven or hell, are they happy or not?
For the devotees, always. For the pure devotee, whether just proper right somewhere. For the pure devotee, heaven or hell, it doesn't make a difference to him.
You know why I'm asking? There are 8 principal gopis, they're serving the Supreme Lord. Surrounding to them, just there are 108 gopis that are surrounding to them, they are serving also. Surrounding to them, there are millions of gopis are there. Surrounding to them, just there are manjaris are there. Surrounding to them, just there are pure devotees holding the straw in their mouth, they're waiting where Krishna is going to send them just to serve, spread his message. So, you know what is called kinkar? What is the meaning of, what is in English?
Servant, maid servant, something like that.
Yeah, right. So they are pure devotees, they're waiting. Wherever Krishna sends, they have to go there. And when they render service, just they become happy. Just, evam prasanna manosa. So they are very happy. So whether they are in New York, whether they are in Atlanta, so they have to
For the devotees, of course, yeah.
Yes.
That's a good point. That's a good point, actually, yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I'm saying, just in my experience, I'm a hardcore New Yorker. You're talking about You're talking about New York. I have been in New York more than 25 years. Still I'm serving, still I'm brahmachari, still I'm preaching, still I'm traveling around the world. So the point is that we have to be happy wherever Krishna puts us to serve. Because without mercy of the Lord, even a blade of grass does not move. So it is Krishna's desire. So I mean to say, we have to be we have to be satisfied wherever we are serving. That's what my point. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you. That's a very good point. Yeah, even I was thinking, even Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he took the austerity preaching in Kolkata, He could have easily stayed in Navadvip, Mayapur Dham, but he took that austerity and he preached there very rigorously. And you see, he was completely, he himself said that, I'm not preaching in Kolkata because I always reside, or I'm not residing in Kolkata because I'm residing in the spiritual world. The Gaudiya Math is identical with the spiritual world. Vaikuntha, yeah. So like that, it's yes. You have something more?
I was telling all yesterday I was telling all you know, if you want to see hell, you come to Calcutta, Prabhupada says. So, but he was born in Calcutta. You know, just like lotus is coming from mud, and within the lotus, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is residing
Yeah.
there. So Prabhupada is coming from hell. But you see his activities. You got it.
Thank you. Anything else from the men?
Hare Krishna. Just one comment and a question. Just, I mean, you were talking before just about people working so hard. I actually didn't realize it, but I was talking with my mother the other day, just about like my grandfather. And just growing up, I mean, like, you know, I was young, I didn't realize, but like, she was telling me that like, he pretty much worked 7 days a week and he had like one job and he would go and work that and then get off and like work another job down the street. And he worked like 3 jobs. I mean, he was like a barber cutting hair.
That's crazy.
But it was crazy. I was like, dang, I was like, you work that hard?
I know.
was like,
I would
never
know a
knew
lot of
that.
people, even during school, that
Yeah.
would work at least 2 jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would go to school.
Yeah, I know a lot of people with 2 jobs too. And then I had one friend growing up also. I mean, he would work so hard, but it's like he would make whatever, like a couple hundred, you know, just like speaking. And then he would just spend even more than he would make. He was always in debt. But anyways, the question is that you read a lot of purport, just like just summarizing about like, you know, sense gratification takes many forms, you know, whatever, religiosity, you know, obviously like gross sense gratification and subtle sense gratification. So, but in Krishna consciousness, I mean, we understand, you know, Krishna, Maya, you know, serve Krishna. But then there's like, seems like there's a thin veneer sometimes where it's like we're serving Krishna and then leaning over into Maya. And sometimes we think we're serving Krishna, but we're really serving Maya. So like, how do we have that clear understanding of like being fixed and serving Krishna?
Could you scroll to the bottom of this purport? I think it comes here actually too. Yeah, so there's Tandir Charana Sebi the chart and live in the society of the devotees. Then one's endeavors to cross over the Nescients will surely be successful. So simply put, if we stay in a devotee association, then like it will be very, very obviously like how to say distinguish between like what is service to Maya and what is service to Krishna. Because on our own, we may be doing something. I mean, there's so many people we know actually who think they're serving Krishna, but actually they're servants of their own senses. They're servants of their own desires and their own conceptions of Krishna consciousness, even though it may be wrong, because the proper association is in there. If the proper association is there and everything's all right there, then inevitably these things will come out. So.
So it is Bhakti Swami Maharaj was asked the same question. Said, ask the Guru. You go and ask your Guru.
That's a good point. That's actually no. That's it's simple, but that's a
simple.
very good point. It's just like some people, you know, whatever they start trying to learn Sanskrit. They start trying to learn complicated kirtans and music. But you should ask even reading so many different things, everything, even whether it's whatever sort of service you're doing, but you should understand what your spiritual master wants from you, because that's the gateway to actually satisfying Krishna. That's a very good point.
Gateway to the great.
Yeah.
Once I asked my personal experience. I was distributing books in Chennai, the local train, like mean to say the standing trains, where there are so many blind people over there. They come to sell so many things. In India, it is common. So I see the blind people, so many blind people. These Christians are taking them, giving them free food, free everything, and converting to Christianity. So I was thinking we should have Bhagavad Gita in, what is that, Braille language. Then I told His Holiness Bhakti Vikas Maharaj that, Maharaj, can we translate Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita into Braille language? Why you want to take that painstaking thing? Somebody will do. You distribute books. So the point is that we may have so many desires to do, like what is Maya, what is Krishna, but better just go to spiritual master and just simply put this one, and spiritual master will tell, this is not right, this is right.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because what's meant for like one disciple doesn't necessarily mean is it like the spiritual master may sanction like one person to learn Sanskrit, but that doesn't mean it's like a blanket like okay for like all of his disciples. That's a very good point.
You know, one thing you're saying, New York, yeah, gotta be crazy to like it. Otherwise, it's hellish.
Yeah.
But you know, one thing too, I always New York is like a Sankirtan paradise.
Or
you
it's
know?
just like he's saying, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. For
New York
service.
is a Sankirtan paradise. You could just walk out your freaking door and like so many people distributing. You could distribute books like anything, you know.
I saw them. Physically, just
Back in the day.
I was watching like this, you know.
And you know, spiritual yoga book. It's not just the purport. It's actually
No,
Prabhupada.
it's the text and the translation.
Yeah, no, not just that. It's lectures that Prabhupada gave in
Oh, is it
Calcutta.
lectures?
The whole context behind.
Oh, I see.
It's purport
must
and
be-
lecture. It's like teachings of Queen Kunti. It's
I
not
see,
just
okay.
purports. Eh? So it's a whole context behind it. Prabhupada was in Calcutta or Bombay, one of the two, and he was seeing these people actually traveling like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then he,
Bombay.
in Bombay,
Basically Bombay.
then he blessed them. You know, and you know, one last thing. You know, one of my favorite quotes of Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, he says, "The Acharya knows what Krishna wants, and he establishes it on the basis of Shastra." You know, it's a very important thing to understand. You know, anyway.
Yeah, we can allow questions from the Maharajas now.
You're speaking about with material relationships, how it's more transactional. You know, like you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Yeah.
But when it comes to devotee relationships, as we were speaking about, sometimes that subtlety of like service to Krishna versus like our own sense gratification can be there. So how can we understand what our duty is or like our service to Krishna is within those relationships?
Our service to Krishna within those relationships are centered around Krishna. Actually, everything. I mean, it's just like we're all most of us are living in an ashram, and we know people within that ashram. Why? Because we want to be Krishna conscious. A simple point, even within like marriage, for instance, the marriage is centered around Krishna, and whatever you do throughout the day, it's centered around Krishna and Krishna service, or the service of Vaishnavas, which is also a devotional service like that. So it's just like so many different things. Just like somebody's cooking back there, somebody else was doing the offering. Later the temple was just cleansed. Otherwise, later brahmacharis will be cleaning the temple. Then people will go out for book distribution and parties. So in this way, devotees will be together with one another, and there's relationships there. But the relationship is centered around like the main object of the relationship is always service. It's not. And in this way, there's how to say it, like. You'll find that I scratch my back and you scratch your back mentality isn't always there, because sometimes devotees may be, how to say it, not nasty is the word, but it may appear very nasty. Sometimes devotees may chastise us, and if you did that to a karmi, it was certainly to break the relationship like anything. But the thing is, the relationship isn't centered around sense gratification; it's centered around Krishna and helping each other become Krishna consciousness. Help advancing Krishna consciousness, rather. So even if those sorts of things come about, it doesn't break the relationship, because elsewhere on, it's just like Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in the same section of this Atmindya Priti Atari Palikam verse. He says that when that I get it mixed up the two. He makes this point that you can tell a relationship where there's love when there is a cause for the relationship to break, but it doesn't break. So, for example, if you look at a mundane work environment, if a supervisor chastises like a junior or something like that, or even if two workers they get in a fight, it's like the relationship is like it just goes to hell, and then they talk to each other, and then even if there's something there, there's like grudges help. But with a devotee, between the devotees, it's not like that. There may be chastisements, there may be disagreements, and even in service. But the central point is that because Krishna is always kept in the center, that the relationship between devotees, there may be even different circles amongst devotees like that, but there's never comes up this feeling of envy between devotees. It's always centered around this person as a Vaishnava, and this person is helping me somehow to advance in Krishna consciousness. So there's some different aspects of covering that question. So, okay, that's it. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada